You know that feeling like when a harsh alarm clock goes off in the pitch dark?
Oh, it is the absolute worst.
Right. It's not just a loud noise, it's a physical jolt. Your nervous system is basically hijacked, cortisol just floods your bloodstream, your heart rate
You're
spikes.
thrust into this sudden, violent state of urgency.
Exactly. And I mean, it's incredibly effective at getting you out of bed, but imagine living inside that single jarring, high alert second all day long.
Which, honestly, isn't that far off from reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, because when you unlock your phone right now, you open a feed and you just start scrolling, that is exactly the biological response you are subjecting your brain to.
Well, the modern digital landscape is built on that exact mechanism. Like, every video, every article, every targeted ad, they're mathematically engineered to trigger an immediate, high-stakes neurological response.
We're constantly demanding the brain to, evaluate and react within a fraction of a second.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
It really is. And that relentless warfare for your attention and how our culture is desperately trying to push back against it is what we are exploring in today's deep dive.
It's a huge topic.
It is. We're looking at two pieces of material today that sit at absolute opposite ends of human consumption. First, we have an actual literal blueprint, like a structural template used to create highly optimized digital content.
Right, the stuff that keeps us scrolling.
Exactly. And on the other side, we have this fascinating 2026 column by a writer who goes by Arunshir from Monumental Movement Records. And that column details the rise of Dreamwave and chill synthwave music.
Which, at first glance, a corporate content strategy and an electronic music subculture seem completely disconnected.
Totally.
But they actually represent the defining push and pull of our era. Like, one is the disease of the attention economy, and the other is a very specific, organically developed cure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the disease. Looking at this content blueprint, it explicitly mandates this ruthless, zero-friction formula for communication.
Zero friction is the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, it dictates that to capture an audience today, a creator has to lead with the conclusion immediately. No preamble, no setting the scene. You basically scream the thesis in the first frame.
Right.
Then you follow that up with a high-stakes hook, and you explicitly state what the viewer will gain by watching.
What's fascinating here is the psychology driving this. It's purely about mitigating cognitive load.
Cognitive load, right, because we're just bombarded all the time.
Exactly. In an environment where you are constantly overwhelmed, your brain is trained to swipe away the moment it encounters friction.
Yeah.
If you don't secure retention in the first, I think the stat is like 0.8 of a second, you lose.
0.8 of a second. That is wild.
Yeah. So by putting the conclusion first, you remove the effort of narrative discovery. You give the brain an immediate microdose of dopamine like, here's the answer, here's why you need it, zero effort required.
It's basically a digital elevator pitch on steroids. It's an aggressively transparent way to deliver information, and it demands your instant engagement.
Completely.
But, reading through this template, my immediate reaction is that this is entirely unsustainable. I mean, if every single piece of media we consume is optimized this way, constantly demanding a high alert reaction, constantly promising high stakes, we aren't just going to get tired.
No, you get massive psychological burnout.
Right. Human beings are not machines built to process a nonstop barrage of optimized data delivery.
We simply lack the neurological infrastructure for it. I mean, a nervous system cannot live in a perpetual state of startle and response.
It just breaks down.
Exactly. When we are constantly forced to synthesize new, highly compressed information, our cognitive bandwidth narrows. We become anxious, exhausted, and just fundamentally overstimulated.
And that state of absolute information overload creates a void, right?
Yes. When people are pushed to their psychological limits by the media they consume, they subconsciously begin hunting for an escape hatch.
And that escape hatch is what brings us to the column by Mr. Mon, because that cultural vacuum is exactly what birthed a musical movement designed specifically not to demand a single thing from you.
Right, which brings us to Dreamwave.
Yeah, Dreamwave and Chill Synthwave. According to the column, these are subgenres that kind of solidified their identity in the 2010s.
Yeah.
And what defines them isn't necessarily what they include, but what they actively strip away.
They lack aggression.
Completely. They suppress what the author terms retro-futuristic exaggeration.
Yeah, and Rister makes a crucial distinction here. They argue these aren't just musical genres. They are, and this is a great quote, listening experience design philosophies.
I love that phrase.
Right. If the digital content blueprint we just discussed is a weapon designed to force information into your brain, Dreamwave is the shield.
Oh, wow.
It is engineered to create emotional resonance, to trigger lingering memories, and to allow for deep introspection without requiring your active participation.
And Chill Synthwave pushes this even further, doesn't it?
Yeah, it strips back the tempo and structure so heavily that it just like melts into your living space.
But hold on, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the goal is to create something that doesn't demand attention, something that just melts into the background, aren't we just talking about modern elevator music?
That's a very common critique.
Like, how is this any different from the music they used to pump into shopping malls in the 90s just to keep people passively walking around?
That's a great challenge. But there is a massive difference in intent and architecture. I mean, Muzak was designed to be entirely featureless. It was just meant to fill silence without evoking any specific emotion.
Sonic wallpaper, basically.
Exactly, sonic wallpaper. But Dreamwave and Chill Synthwave are incredibly emotionally potent. They don't want you to feel nothing. They want you to feel safe.
Ah, okay. That's a big distinction.
And they achieve that by utilizing a very specific aesthetic toolkit, which is the 1980s. But, and Etcher's column stresses this heavily, this is not simple 80s nostalgia. They weren't trying to recreate the actual decade.
Right, people aren't just wanting to wear neon sunglasses and pretend they are in a retro arcade. The column argues that in this movement, the 80s is a material, not a goal, which is such a fascinating concept.
Think about a sculptor working with marble.
Yeah.
The artist isn't trying to celebrate the geological history of the stone, right? They are using the properties of the marble to create a specific feeling in the present.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense.
The 1980s being referenced in Dreamwave is a collective memory. It's a reconstructed, idealized version of the past, viewed through a distinctly modern, internet-era lens.
So it's basically a game of cultural telephone.
Pretty much.
The actual 1980s happened. Then, around 2010, the internet took those old VHS tapes, synthesizer tracks, and neon aesthetics, compressed them, shared them on blogs.
Tumblr was huge for this.
Yes. And what came out the other end was this distilled feeling of the era.
It's an imagined past. And the reason this specific era works as the material is because the 1980s represents the dawn of the digital age.
Oh, right, because it's when tech was still
Yeah,
optimistic.
exactly. It was the moment we had the promise of incredible technology. But just before that technology became the overwhelming, burnout-inducing force it is today.
So these artists are basically building a psychological safe room out of retro aesthetics to shelter us from the hyper-optimized present.
That is exactly what they're doing.
To really understand how they build that safe room, though, we have to look at the sonic architecture, because the acoustic mechanics detailed in the column are just fascinating.
They really are.
The music relies on highly transparent harmony, incredibly stable tempos, and very slow, deliberate timbral changes. The instruments themselves are just iconic. You have those warm Juno-style synth pads, the spuckling DX electric pianos.
Chorus bass lines.
Yeah, chorus bass lines. And a massive use of spatial effects like delay and reverb.
Well, there's a deep historical and acoustic reason for those specific choices. The real 1980s saw an absolute explosion in electronic music vocabulary.
All right, the tech just leveled up completely.
Exactly. You had the widespread availability of polyphonic synthesizers, meaning keyboards that could play multiple notes at once, allowing for complex chords.
Before that, a lot of synths could only play one note at a time, right?
Yeah, monophonic. But polyphony changed everything. And then you had the invention of MIDI, which allowed all these electronic machines to actually talk to each other. And crucially, you had FM synthesis.
Which gives us that very specific, icy, metallic sound, right?
Yes, frequency modulation. So unlike older analog synths that start with a thick buzzing sound wave and filter it down to create warmth, FM synthesis uses one sound wave to literally vibrate the frequency of another.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It was notoriously hard to program.
Yeah.
But that acoustic collision creates those crystal clear, bell-like, slightly synthetic tones that just didn't exist in popular music before that era.
So Dreamwave artists are taking the exact acoustic vocabulary of the 80s, but they are speaking a completely different emotional language with it.
Exactly. And that language is defined by the chord structures.
Right. The column points out that Dreamwave relies heavily on major seventh, add nines, and suspended chords, or sus chords.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the music theory directly combats the attention economy.
How so?
Well, in traditional pop or classical music, chords are usually moving toward a resolution. You create tension, and then you release it.
It's like a narrative arc.
Yes. It demands your attention because it tells a story with a beginning, middle, and end. But major sevenths and sus chords do the opposite. A suspended chord literally omits the note that tells your brain whether the chord is happy or sad.
It refuses to land.
It refuses to land. It prioritizes a feeling of continuation. It floats.
You know, when I was listening to the source tracks for this deep dive, the best analogy I could come up with for those sus chords is that they feel like an audio infinity pool.
Oh, an audio infinity pool. I really like that.
Right, like a normal pop song is like a standard swimming pool. It has a shallow end, a deep end. You swim from one side to the other, you hit the wall, and the song is over.
There's a climax, a resolution, and an edge.
Exactly. But Dreamwave has no clear edge. The water just spills over the horizon indefinitely. The chords never resolve, they just keep flowing into each other. It acts as an apparatus to maintain a very specific, stable emotional space.
And that stability is exactly what the overwhelmed modern brain is desperately craving. I mean, you don't have to anticipate the beat drop.
No jump scare.
Right? You don't have to parse a complex lyrical narrative or wait for a punchline. You can just exist inside the sound without evaluating it.
But Mr. makes a really strong point that you can't fully understand Dreamwave and Chill Synthwave just by listening to the audio. The visual connection is absolutely paramount.
They are inseparable.
Yeah. You have to pair the audio infinity pool with the right imagery. The column lists very specific visual tropes. Dusk cities, glowing neon signs, endless coastlines, night drives, and that slightly degraded tracking error texture of an old VHS tape.
Well, those visual elements are operating on the exact same psychological level as the suspended chords.
Like they don't tell a story either.
Exactly. A looping gif of a sports car driving down a neon-lit highway at night isn't a narrative. It's a state of being. The visuals sync with the stable tempo and the floating synths to evoke a feeling of a scene seen somewhere before.
A scene seen somewhere before.
The Japanese actually have a term for this, Jukei Kyoku scenic memory. It triggers a profound sense of nostalgia for a memory you never actually lived.
That is wild. It's implanting a comforting memory of a neon highway in 1986, even if you were, born in 1999.
Yeah.
And to ground this theory, the column highlights a couple of pioneer artists who really perfected this illusion. First, there's FM-84, who is positioned as a quintessential Dreamwave project.
They're huge in that space.
Right. The column notes how FM-84 blends 80s AOR-like album-oriented rock, those big cinematic sweeping arrangements with film score sensibilities. But it's not just a dusty recreation. What makes FM-84 work is the modern mixing.
Yeah, because if they just recorded the track to sound exactly like a degraded cassette tape, it would veer back into being a cheap gimmick.
It would just be a novelty.
Exactly. By using crystal clear, modern production techniques, they create a perfect balance. Nostalgia and presentness exist simultaneously. It's music explicitly linked to night views and the sensation of forward movement.
Then, on the far end of the spectrum, Mr. highlights Timecop1983 to represent the chill synthwave approach.
Which is much softer.
Very much so. Where FM-84 has those big, soaring melodies, Timecop1983 pulls the rhythm back to the absolute minimum. The focus is entirely on the melody and those floating, unresolved chord progressions we talked about.
It acts almost like background music, but in the best way possible.
Right. It blends perfectly into your environment, but it's designed so that if you do choose to pay attention, you are rewarded with these tiny, subtle shifts in tone and harmony.
Which brings us to the profound conclusion Mr. reaches in the column regarding how this music is actually consumed.
So what does this all mean for how we actually listen?
Well, we don't listen to Dreamwave the way we listen to a pop anthem.
Mm-hmm.
It is consumed environmentally.
Meaning like we just put it on while doing other things.
Yeah. You listen to it during a late-night work session on a long commute or when you are simply trying to decompress. Think about how time functions in most media today. A fast dance track divides your time into rigid, energetic beats.
Sure.
A YouTube short or a TikTok video divides your time into frantic, optimized micro-narratives.
Like the blueprint we started with.
Exactly. But this music doesn't divide time. As Emus beautifully describes it, it wraps time.
It wraps time. Wow. That is such a stark contrast to that aggressive content formula.
It's the antidote. In a society run by hyper-optimized algorithms demanding your attention every single second, people crave an environment that makes no excessive claims on them.
They just want to be left alone.
Yes, they want media that doesn't demand a reaction, that doesn't force a conclusion down their throat in the first 0.8 of a second. They want something that just wraps around them and allows them to breathe.
That makes so much sense. So, to you listening right now, think about your own daily habits. You live in a world where everything you read, watch, and hear is mathematically optimized to spike your heart rate and hook your attention from the very first frame.
That's a lot to deal with.
It is. And the rise of Dreamwave and Chill Synthwave is proof that when you feel the urge to throw on a 10-hour loop of a neon sunset and just zone out to some floating synthesizers, that isn't you being lazy.
Not at all.
That is your brain executing a necessary cultural survival mechanism against information overload. You are actively seeking out art that wraps time to heal the burnout caused by a world that constantly divides it.
Which leads us with a really fascinating, almost haunting question to consider.
Ooh, okay, what's that?
Well, if this entire musical and aesthetic movement from the 2010s and 2020s is based on reconstructing a fake, idealized collective memory of the 1980s, simply to soothe the intense anxieties of our modern, hyper-connected era, what imaginary, idealized version of our current decade will the people of the 2060s reconstruct to escape the overwhelming realities of their own future?
Wow. Will they be looking back at our, optimized content algorithms with some sort of twisted nostalgia?
It's definitely possible.
That is a wild thought to leave off on. But until the 2060s arrive, the next time the digital alarm clock of modern life starts screaming at you, just remember, you are allowed to hit snooze, step into the audio infinity pool, and let the time wrap around you.